Here it is, from 2014, Private Screenings, Robert Osborne.
Hi, I'm Alec Baldwin, and welcome to a very special Private Screenings. Turner Classic Movies was launched on April 14, 1994, and from the beginning, Robert Osborne has been the channel's host and driving force. Osborne is a man whose fascinating stories, historical knowledge, and sheer love of the subject have made his name synonymous with classic film. But the story of Robert Osborne's own life is one that could be a movie itself. A small-town boy who at a young age falls in love with film, moves to Hollywood, and gives acting a try. He then becomes a writer, an Oscar historian, and creates an industry for himself as the keeper of the flame of classic film. All this at a time when nostalgia for Hollywood didn't even exist. Then along came Turner Classic Movies, with a job custom-made for his passion. Today, TCM is more popular than ever, a channel marking its 20th year and showing, on average, nearly 400 movies a month. TCM has also expanded its reach with an annual film festival in Hollywood, as well as cross-country screenings and glamorous ocean sailing cruises catering to thousands of classic movie fans.
Thank you.
And no one would argue that Robert Osborne is one of the primary reasons for TCM's ongoing success. So here's a look at the life, the career, and the story of my friend, Robert Osborne, next on Private Screenings.
Is that, and I was very lucky early on, this is a whole story unto itself, was put under contract to Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz at the Desilu studios. I wanted to be an actor, I thought, and the training I got, though in what little I did do on camera as an actor, I was in the pilot for the Beverly Hillbillies, which I thought nobody would ever see again, and which still, you know, shows up on YouTube and haunts you.
Who did you play? Were you their banker? Were you the Clampetts banker?
I was the right-hand man of the banker.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Drysdale.
All right, Taylor. Well, are we all set to give the Clampetts a red carpet reception?
Well, I'm afraid Mrs. Drysdale still isn't too happy, sir.
Yes, I know. Oh, my wife is very upset that I got the estate next to ours for the Clampetts. Says I don't even know what kind of people they are.
Do you?
I know to the dollar what kind of people they are. They're my kind of people. Loaded.
But I had no idea.
It's classic television.
Yes, that it would be classic television. But
you and
anyway,
I would kill to be on Beverly Hillbillies now.
The experience of being in it got me comfortable on camera. So when I became a journalist, and it was Lucille Ball who actually said, you know, you could do this. You know, you could do this. But it's not going to make you happy. She got to know me, and she got to know my folks. And she said, you know, you come from a nice, normal family. You're not street smart. You're not from New York. And she said, you know, I think you could learn to do all that, but it's not part of your nature. You love films, you love research.
And appreciation.
Yeah, be a journalist. You were a journalist at major college. That's what you should do. And she said, we have enough actors. We don't have enough people, you know, that are writing about the industry and stuff. And she said, and the first thing you should do is write a book if you're a journalist. And I said, why that? And she said, because if you're a journalist and you write a book, people will look at you differently. They know you have the discipline to sit down and do it.
Right.
And in those days, you had to put paper in a typewriter and type it out. And if it didn't work, you took that out and you had to retype it and everything. So it wasn't that easy to be writing.
It was a lot of manual labor compared to now.
Yeah, a little easier today with computers. And she's the one that really guided me away from acting. So I became a journalist. I finally got on with the Hollywood Reporter, and they would come to the Hollywood Reporter and they'd say, a TV station, they'd say, hey, Henry Fonda's in the hospital. We need somebody to come on the news and talk about Henry Fonda. And they always say, well, you know, Osborne knows all those old movie stars, you know, and they would send me. So I got experience doing television. The first thing I ever did on television actually was standing out in front of Cedar-Sinai Hospital doing a live telecast about Henry Fonda being in the hospital. One of the other lucky things for me was the fact of meeting Lucille Ball, because being around Lucille Ball when I was and being invited to her house, I realized, because at this point, Lucille Ball was maybe the most famous woman in the world. I mean, this was at the peak of her success. And she was having trouble with her husband, and he wasn't around so much, so she was always gathering a couple of us from the Desilu group to come and play cards and be at her house. And so in the course of that, I saw that this famous woman had headaches like everybody else. She was having kids that she was raising.
She was real.
She was real, but she was a human being. By that same token, I could later in the week see that Lucille Ball enter an event and think, oh my God, Lucille Ball, it's so exciting. You know, I could see her as the movie star, but I also knew she was a human being. So I was always comfortable meeting those people. So as big a fan as I was of Betty Davis to me was somebody who was very kind, very interesting. Complicated woman, but a terrific woman. Only really complicated when she got ill and could never say, I don't feel well. She would just take it out on you, you know, with anger or something like that. But she was a terrific person. Mm-hmm. And so I was comfortable around these people. So that helped, too. Because if, say, the first person I'd met was not Lucille Ball, but, say, Lana Turner, that I was kind of batty about, I probably would have been very tongue-tied. And so when I eventually did meet Lana Turner, I realized that this was a human being like everybody else. So I went back to the studio, to Desilu, to thank the people for casting me, and to Paul Henry had an office there, to thank him. And I went to the casting place, and the guy said, well, no, it was a pleasure, and Paul liked working with you. And are you going to be auditioning for the Lucille Ball contract list she's putting together? I said, no, I don't know anything about that. He said, well, I think it's this coming week. Well, let me call her office and find out when the auditions are. So he called the office, and Lucille Ball answered the phone. And so he was saying, you know, I got this guy here that might be right for your group, and I just need to know what day the auditions are and how does he sign up for that. So, and she obviously said, well, I'm not doing anything right now. Send him up. So I went up to this office, and there was Lucille Ball. And now this sounds strange, but I was such a movie guy, and I know she'd made movies, and I certainly, God knows, knew who she was. But she was a great television star, and I never watched television, so I didn't really have the knowledge of her as a television star that we all found out later.
That's tough when you meet television stars and they say, "Do you remember that episode where my character bought the bagel and it fell in the grate on the street?" And you're like, "Oh yes, yeah, I remember that." Yeah, and you've never seen the show in your whole life. It's weird. Yeah.
So we sat and talked, and she was fascinated by the fact that I was staying at Jane Darwell's house, because to her, the people she'd loved working with were the character actors, Harpo Marx and Charles Coburn and Donald Meek and Edward Everett Horton and people like that. Because I was trying to ask her about actors that she'd worked with, and she said, well, the actors didn't mean that much to me, the leading men. She said, I love the character people. I learned so much from them. And I knew who they were, and that fascinated her, because she thought, this kid, how does he know who Charles Coburn is, you know, because he was long since gone at that point. And so she seemed kind of interested, and she said, do you have any film on yourself? And I said, well, I have a film that I just did with Paul Henry here, but I don't think that'd be ready, because we just stopped filming yesterday. And I said, I did a test with Diane Baker at 20th Century Fox for a role in Diary of Anne Frank. And I said, but the test was for her, so I don't know, how I came off on that. And so she got right on the phone. She called Fox, and she said, look, I want to look at the Diane Baker test for Diary of Anne Frank. Can you send it? It's Lucille Ball. Send it over. And we watched the test, and it wasn't particularly good. For me, it barely saw me, and Diane was wonderful in it and got the part. And so when it was over, Lucy was kind of cool. And I thought, well, she didn't like the test, but at least I had a chance to spend like an hour talking to Lucille Ball. So I left, thought no more about it, and about a week later, I got a telephone call from her office. It said, to my answering service, said, Lucille Ball wants you to call. Can you come to dinner on Friday night? She wants you to meet Desi. So I thought, well, maybe something's going on again. So I got all dressed up. I went to her house on Friday night, went in the door, and there was like Kay Thompson, Joseph Cotton, Janet Gaynor, Roger Edens, Chuck Walters, and a couple of other people, and Lucille Ball, no Desi. So we sat, I thought, this is exciting, but it's really strange company. So we had dinner, and then we all went in the living room. I didn't talk much, but I talked tried to talk enough that I wasn't just totally, invisible. So, but these were heavy hitters, and they were all great friends. And Kate Thompson did a lot of talking and everything. We went in the living room, and we started watching Funny Face, which was a couple of years old at that point, with Audrey Hepburn and Kate Thompson, that Roger Edens was also involved in. And I remember during one part of it when Audrey Hepburn and
screening on a projector.
Yeah,
right.
35 millimeter. And with all these heavy hitters, and at one point, Kate Thompson and Audrey Hepburn are doing a number together. And Kate Thompson got up by the screen and started doing the number with it. And I started to say to myself, did you ever believe that you're ever going to be in this? And I thought, wait a minute. No, I always knew I was going to.
Did you?
I'd projected things like that. That I always knew I was going to be part of that circle. But I didn't know how I was going to be there. I thought maybe I was going to be there as an actor, but I wasn't sure that was going to work out.
Back then, when you projected that you thought you'd be part of that circle, how did you define that circle? A circle of people who loved quality films as much as you did?
Yeah. And movie people, and people were making those movies. People like
the good movies, the smart movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you weren't making.
And so, so I thought, so I was going to be here. And I thought, well, you were so stupid, but that's how you felt. So then when the evening was over, after the movie was over, everybody started to leave. So I started to leave too. And I thought, well, I don't know why I was here. And we got to the door, and Lucy said, well, have you signed those contracts yet? And I said, what contracts? And she said, like, really angry at me, the contracts to be part of my under contract to Desilu. Yeah, you stupid idiot.
You stupid.
And I said, no, nobody's ever said anything. She said, well, do they have your address? And
Don't you live in a doorman building?
Yes.
Good God.
I said, well, I think they do, but I'll call them and give it to them. She said, well, they'll send them over to you tomorrow. Sign them. And bang went the door. And I walked down and I thought, my God, I'm under contract with Lucille Ball.
You're in.
Bob was in your workshop.
He was the first young person that I laid eyes on, and boing, I said, wow, that young man. Then when I got to know him, even better.
What did you think of Bob as an actor?
Oh, he was wonderful. He did some marvelous things for us. He was a natural actor. And when he was called upon to do things that were not in his, when they're just starting, he really worked at it. He was very conscientious. But he was always such a gentleman and such a doll and so nice to look at and be around.
Let there be fun everywhere. We want to be by you.
And that was the greatest thing that happened to me, and that was luck again, because Desi was not around. There was another guy, Dick Coleman, who had an unfortunate end to his life later, but he was been on Broadway and kind of knew show business. And Lucy kind of liked the two of us being around because she thought I could make him a little less show busy, and he would make me a little jazzier, not quite so square. And so she would have us over to the house a lot. She would show movies that she'd been in, the ones that worked and the ones that didn't work. She'd show a lot of her television shows and show us, a one that was not funny, an episode, and why that could have been funny, why it didn't work, and how she'd show a good one, why it did work, and how I remember an illustration that she said that, if you've got to play a cello poorly, you first have to learn how to play it correctly so you know how to be funny doing it. Because otherwise you're just flailing around and it's not funny. And how you have to be prepared and all that. It was like a year's master class with this great artist about the business. And she would take us, because she was not paying us much money, she would take us when Marlene Dietrich would come to the Amundsen and then take us backstage because she knew Dietrich so we could meet her. She took us backstage after seeing Vivian Leigh and Duel of Angels at the Huntington Hartford Theater. First time I ever met Betty Davis was she took us back after seeing The World of Carl Sandburg that Betty Davis was doing there. So we had this great opportunity to meet these people, also see these great artists on the stage. And I got to say, that was such a stroke of luck to meet somebody who was willing to give us this education. And because she also knew that both Dick Coleman and I had a serious interest in being a part of the business in a serious way. So she was like spending the time teaching us this stuff that we could use later, and it's come in so handy so many times.
What would you identify as the time when you're when this kind of apprenticeship, if you will, that you're doing underneath Lucille Ball, when does that come to an end, and what becomes the next chapter of your career?
Well, the next chapter kind of came thanks to